Hello and welcome to Shattered Lives, Reach Ireland's crime podcast. I'm Paul Healy. I'm crime correspondent for the Irish Mirror and the Irish Daily Star, and I'm joined by Michael O'Toole, our crime and defence editor. How's it going, Michael?
Hello, Paul. How's things?
Not too bad, not too bad. Reporting from what looks like a basement here, but I'm just in a different location today.
No, we've decided to keep Healy prisoner. He's never getting out.
Well, it's been an interesting week, really. We've been following up mostly on a lot of the horrendous events of last week, and in particular, we want to just note again the very tragic death of Nicola Morey. The investigation now has progressed significantly since that terrible events last week in County Limerick, where Nicole was attacked by two of her dogs, one of which an XL bully dog that was shot and killed by Gardaí at the scene, and she sadly lost her life. Her funeral has since taken place. I just want to briefly mention that there were very emotional pictures from the funeral that took place, and there were poignant tributes from her family. She has 10 siblings, and her father paid tribute at the funeral, and her sister also. And the funeral heard how the family are broken by her very tragic loss. And then as her body was released to her family, the remaining dogs that were involved in the incident, the other three dogs were put down. Look, that we kind of expected that to be the case anyway. That would be the policy, that would something that would happen in an incident such as this. But there have been quite a few developments since, haven't there, just in terms of the political, I suppose, conversation and what needs to happen next as regards to the law here in Ireland to do with XL bully dogs. And our colleague Louise Byrne was involved in this story yesterday when Minister Heather Humphreys basically she has stepped up and the process of possibly banning the XL bully breed here in Ireland. So there has been conversation around that, and certainly the minister last week had indicated that she had a working group, an independent group run by a retired Garda superintendent, looking at the possibility of restricting breeds and what can be done. But now she seems to be taking it upon herself to go that step further and to look at banning the XL breed quicker than was even expected as a result of this incident and a number of other incidents that have happened in the last couple of weeks. So yeah, we're going to see a possible legislation change very soon, and just like we always seem to be following the UK, but just like the UK and Northern Ireland, we're now going to have a ban on the XL bully breed here in Ireland.
Two questions arise here. Do you think it's fair on all the XL bullies and all the owners of XL bullies that this is happening? Are they right to feel aggrieved? Because I think they will be aggrieved. I think it's fair to say they will be aggrieved.
I think they will be aggrieved, and certainly they're very passionate on social media, those owners of XL bully breed dogs. Again, as I said on the previous podcast, I'm not an expert about dog breeds, but I would point to the people that are now coming out and speaking about this issue are far more educated on the topic than you or I. And, there have been veterinarians and people who have been coming forward and talking about how this breed is very specifically, powerful enough to kill a human being. And that's the issue here. That when sadly something goes wrong, the dog, I think, is just too powerful and has the ability to kill. It just latches on and won't let go. And so while I understand why those owners might feel aggrieved, in my own personal opinion, which means very little, I think this is the right move. The facts are borne out in a number of attacks that have now happened. There was an incident there in Limerick in 2022, which we covered, in Wexford, where a young boy, Alejandro Maizan, was very, very badly injured by an XL bully dog. The owners were prosecuted in relation to that. And then even just within days of the incident with Nicola Morey last week, there was another dog attack incident in Cork, where armed Gardaí had to put that dog down. So dog attacks are becoming more frequent, and look, I think something just has to be done about it. That's just my opinion. What do you think?
I don't know. I'm not a dog owner. I was a dog owner when I was younger. I'd love a dog, but I wouldn't be getting a breed like that, or a pit bull
Yeah.
or anything like that. So I mean, and if you look at last week's pod, I think an awful lot of dog owners and specialist breed dog owners did watch it, and I mean, I did read an awful lot of comments. I don't know if there were almost, I think, 400 comments, and a lot of people, they're very, very passionate about this. There's one thing that has jumped out in me, and I noted what Heather Humphrey said yesterday. She said she's going to consult with Rossa Fanning, who's the Attorney General, about banning these dogs. Now, that tells me that this is going to be a legal minefield. Because, in other words, the government aren't just bringing this in, they're going to have to go and talk to the country's top legal officer. And that is an indication, because I was reading, I know that it's Denmark they're banned in, I know in England they're banned, and up north they're working on similar legislation. But there have been legal challenges to this. And the one thing about Ireland, we have a written constitution and it's absolutely fantastic, but people do have the right to challenge things in the courts. So I think it's inevitable that this will end up in the courts.
Yeah, and it's a complicated issue. I mean, the minister is consulting to see whether there needs to be legislation brought forward, and that so she is not exactly sure what steps she needs to take, but she is certainly indicating that she is personally in favor of banning an XL bully breed. Now, the other big thing that might happen that'll get in the way of that between now and next March, and even before that, and it's looking increasingly more like it'll be well before that, is a general election. So that's going to just halt that completely. So it's all well and good politicians, after a poor woman has lost her life, now saying, hey, we got to do something about this. But I think it's going to be, you're not going to see it happening tomorrow, are you?
Well, unless Mr. Fanning, Rossa Fanning, gives legal advice that there doesn't need to be legislation, that it could be, well, then, call it a statutory instrument and they can just bring it in. But I do think that people will go to court about this. And here's another question. I was just thinking about this today. If the breed is banned, right? And I only found out reading today that they're a crossbreed. So if the crossbreed is banned, does that mean all the dogs have to be destroyed straight away? So guards, I presume, are going to have to go into houses and take these dogs off owners.
It's a complicated one, and I think even still there are serious legal challenges and issues with that in the UK. So it's something, yeah, you're right. I think owners will vehemently challenge.
And here's another question. Just say you're 3/4 XL bully and 1/4, I don't know, Alsatian or whatever. Is there a threshold? Do you have to be 80% this dog breed to be destroyed? You know what I mean? So I think this is fraught with real problems. But look, a lady lost her life. And if you remember last week in the pod, I did think that, I've always noticed that things just tend to happen in pairs or threes. And there were two dog attacks after our pod when I spoke of my fears that does happen, because these things do happen like that.
Two separate incidents, including an incident in County Cork where I mentioned that again, armed Gardaí had to shoot the dog dead. So I mean, that shows you the power of some of these breeds, that it requires armed force. Thankfully, there was not a fatal case. Two people were taken to hospital with injuries. It could have been much worse. Look, I mean, there've been several local representatives and stuff now coming forward expressing that these they're hearing more and more of these incidents. There's been an increase in these incidents in recent times. In fact, I was surprised to discover that Limerick County Council had actually issued a warning only the month prior to this tragic incident with Nicola Morey in the same county. There was a warning specifically about XL bully dogs and dangerous breeds and keeping them muzzled, keeping them on leashes. So there were concerns about dog attacks in Limerick within a month of when this fatal incident happened. So it wasn't news necessarily to the local body anyway, the local council.
I tell you what I think is going to happen. And I mean, XL bully owners probably won't want to hear this, but there's an old saying, you can't beat City Hall. And more often than not, the state wins. So even if there is a legal challenge and it goes to the High Court or whatever, I predict that the state will get its way. And unfortunately, for owners, these dogs will be banned. And then that's the headache of what happens. The dogs are there, and I don't think it looks good for those dogs. I'm sorry to say, I just think that's what's going to happen, really, that they will probably be destroyed.
Should we talk about the murder in Finglas?
Yes. So this was interesting. I was working on Sunday morning. It was my weekend off, but somebody messaged me and said, "Why is nobody talking about this murder?" And I went, "What murder?" And they filled me in that there'd been a stabbing in Finglas, and it hadn't really come out. So we made a few inquiries, and we ascertained that a man in the Scribbles area had been stabbed 1 o'clock on Sunday morning. Now, eventually, the poor victim's name emerged on Sunday afternoon. He was a man called Marky Carroll, known as Marky, 34-year-old father of two, very well known in the area, very well respected in the area. And looking at the tributes online, there's been a huge amount of tributes to him, and we know that there's a GoFundMe. We did a piece in the Mirror and the Star about that, and it's still open. People are trying to help the family cope with the funeral costs and the aftermath of this, I suppose. So yeah, it's a pretty. He was stabbed. I think he was stabbed several times, but they have upgraded it to murder. So that's obviously very, very serious.
But of course, the suspect in this case is on the run as of the recording of this podcast now on Wednesday. He's several days missing at this point, the main suspect in this. And of course, he's well known to Gardaí. We know who he is. We're not going to say his name on this podcast, for legal reasons, obviously. But this person is a convicted killer himself, did prison time for the killing of a woman. And as I said, he has served time in prison, and is, I suppose in one sense it might to his family come as a shock that he's got involved in yet another violent incident. But our understanding of this, the background of this is that the victim, Mr. Carroll, would have been, I suppose, an associate or friend of the suspect in this case, and that they had something of a verbal row that sadly turned violent. And Mr. Carroll lost his life, was stabbed by this individual who's now fled. And I suppose I had a story in the Star and the Mirror today, just that I suppose Gardaí now have their suspicions or their fears that there are individuals helping the suspect in this case to stay hidden, effectively shielding him from Gardaí. Sometimes when we use the word manhunt, I think it kind of sounds like they're actively going around, banging down doors and driving all over Dublin trying to find this person. I think the Gardaí involved in this are mounting a very sophisticated surveillance operation. And I would say they probably know where their target is, and they're just biding their time, possibly trying to work with people who would know him. They're obviously hoping that this person, that they're able to apprehend him in a safe way, and that they're able to question him. And so there have to be all kinds of considerations taken when somebody is involved in an incident like this.
They did search at least one property linked to this man, but it's quite rare for someone to go on the run, really. And I was speaking to some people. I was going, is there a belief that he may have gone up north or tried to get to Britain? And I think they're said they're happy enough that they believe he is in the Dublin area. Maybe he's been shielded by somebody or protected by somebody. Maybe he might hand himself in, he might, who knows? But I'd be quite surprised if this manhunt, and it is a manhunt, if this manhunt goes on much longer. I think Dublin is a small town, and and even where he is, he's, I'm not being facetious, he's hardly going to go and hide in Foxrock. You know what I mean? He's going to know, he will have haunts.
I just get the impression, reading the tea leaves or reading between the lines, that they have a very good idea of where he is, and they're just biding their time. But this individual also has form for fleeing. Again, I had to be careful not to identify him, but it also wasn't immediately apprehended after the original killing that he was involved in a number of years ago as well.
But but that was resolved very quickly, shall we say?
Yes, it was. It was. And look, more will come to light if this individual is arrested and possibly charged. So we'll see what happens there.
It just is interesting. The guards have upgraded it to murder. So that indicates, that it was more than one stab, that it was, the guards believe there's a threshold for it to be a murder inquiry, not a fatal stabbing or a fatal assault that they would call it. So that does tell you something.
Yeah, and look, I mean, this is a very complex thing. As I said, the victim and the perpetrator, the alleged perpetrator in this case, were friends. There were connections between families, and as I have in my story today, there have been tributes online to Mark Carroll, including from family members, close family members, uh, of the person who's suspected of carrying out this murder. They have actually paid tribute to the victim. So it shows you that the interconnectivity of this, and I suppose the tragedy of this in a sense as well.
Yeah, yeah. But I would suspect that by the time our next pod comes out, the matter will have been resolved. And even by the time that this pod hits the
Quite
airwaves or
possibly.
whatever, it could be resolved as well.
Quite possibly. Shall we talk about Jonathan Dowdall?
Let's talk about Jonathan Dowdall.
Well, Jonathan Dowdall, like the Kinahans and the Hutches, and I suppose he is tied up with both of them, is a story that just keeps on giving, isn't he?
He isn't.
But this is something that I think has been on every journalist's radar. I can't tell you how many times a week I have typed in 270 Navan Road because I've just been waiting for the moment where he actually went to sell this house. Of course, the day that I was off, it's the day that the ad goes up. But
I,
anyway,
I'm going to tell you, Haley, I broke the story. I was just slightly ahead of you on it, I think. I've never searched for 270 Navan Road. It just fell into my lap. These things
yes,
happen.
you know the way you have previously on this pod, talked about how you've cursed other journalists for getting ahead of you, getting a story before you. When you put into that work WhatsApp group, I went, the fucker.
I know Dowdall is your speciality, so I leave that to Haley. But look, that's the beauty. Just, things fall into your lap. And
Well,
thanks
look,
very much to whoever told me. So anyway.
yeah, and I've received a few messages about it myself as well. Obviously, a lot of people were keeping watch on it, but I suppose, on a more serious side to this, I mean, Jonathan Dowdall is a serious criminal. He is a torturer, a convicted torturer. He waterboarded a man in his home. He was involved with, serious dissident Republicans, and then with the Hutches. Is a liar, someone who can't be trusted, and someone who appears to have had vast amount of wealth throughout his life. Despite kind of, I would say, modest upbringing, was an electrician. Yes, he did employ people, but the wealth that he already possesses is incredible. I don't know where the money came from. I mean, obviously he's done very, very well in life, but now to see him, still in prison, serving time for his involvement in the plot, I suppose, the Regency Hotel murder of David Byrne, now selling his home for a serious, serious sum of money. It kind of
800 grand, is it?
It's close to
Oh.
€800, yeah. And I mean, it'd probably go for even more than that. It's in a prime part of Dublin on the Navan Road there. And look, I mean, I think it's quite tacky the way he's done it up, but it is a beautiful sized house, and there's plenty that you can do with it. And I'm sure that but he's going to make a serious amount of money when he gets out of prison. He will. Well, he already is, in my opinion. He will be an even more wealthy man. So I think, okay, despite the fact that he might be looking over his shoulder for some time, I think Jonathan Dowdall is a very lucky man still, a very, very lucky man.
I wonder, does this mean how long has he got? Sorry, how long has he got left in prison?
Well, that's the golden
Mm.
question, isn't it? Yeah, I think we will be seeing Jonathan Dowdall come out of prison next year.
Okay. Does
And then,
this mean? So we remember from the trial that he was being, I think the phrase was being assessed for the
yeah.
witness security program.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody speculated that this means that he may have difficulty getting on that program. I don't know. What do you think, Paul?
Well, we've both been hearing varying theories on this, haven't we? But I mean, we've not got a definitive answer on this. The only thing that, from a couple of conversations that I've had, I would speculate that he has been either refused it or he hasn't got it yet. But I think at this stage, I mean, he should have been considered. But I spoke to a couple of very kind of good prison sources, shall we say, who have said to me that if the Gardaí had come looking for him and said, "We need him now." That he would be given temporary release almost immediately, and he would be allowed to leave Limerick prison if he was signed up to the witness protection program. And that was something actually that certain prison people within the prison authorities were expecting to happen. I might stand corrected on that, but that's my understanding of the situation. Is they were ready for a situation where he would be taken out of prison early, and it hasn't happened yet, which says to me, something's up there. It seems to me he's been refused it, or he just hasn't been accepted into it yet for whatever
And the
reason.
difficulty is, it's the funny fellas, as I call them, the people in security and intelligence and
I'm
liaison
not going to tell him.
protection. And
Yeah.
they had no chance of anybody, them talking to anybody, that they'd probably arrest you first if we asked. So that's going to be a difficulty. But you remember that story we had, that there was, I sort of got an indication there was a difficulty because what country would take him, because he was involved in waterboarding somebody. So the way it works is the Garda Síochána have to persuade another country to take this person on. That's what happens in witness, and it happens the vice versa. Crime security and security intelligence look after people who come here. So, what country in their right mind is going to let somebody in who waterboarded somebody and said he's going to shoot them and all that sort of stuff? I mean, it was a pretty bad torture he carried out. So,
Yeah.
maybe that's a problem.
Now, the alternate theory is he's selling his house because he's expecting to leave the country very soon, and so I mean that's another theory. But of course, I think whether he's staying in this country or not, I don't think he can go back to that house, can he?
Or if he goes in the WSP or not, can he stay in Ireland? Maybe he's just going to have to skedoodle no matter what. You know what I'm saying? Maybe it'd be far too hot for him here, and especially, he's living in the north inner city Dublin. So there'll be a lot of people in that general area who would not be his biggest fan.
Exactly. I want to read out just some of the ad here. So it's Flynn estate agents who are selling the house, and I'm looking at the myhome.ie ad here. It's going for €795,000. It's got 3 bathrooms. It's got 4 bedrooms. I'm going to read all of this out, but it says, upon entering 270, you are greeted with a spacious hallway, marble tiles throughout, kitchen extending, boasting plenty of natural light and additional worktop space, perfect for all your culinary needs. A spacious garage provides secure parking for your vehicles. There is a video of the interior of the property, and you can see that garage. I just want to remind people that this is the same garage that Jonathan Dowdall and his father tortured a man and waterboarded him and filmed it. But yeah, it can be yours just for €795,000. There's also what would you call it? A fish pond, an exotic fish pond out the back garden. It really is. It has to be seen to be believed. You have to look at the pictures of it. Like it is. The back garden is basically set up like a Japanese garden. There's Buddha temple type vibe and Buddhist type statues, and this huge big fish pond, exotic fish pond. It's extraordinary.
Are you on a commission, Paul? You did a very good job selling it. It raises another question. Obviously, a very serious crime has been committed in that house.
Yeah.
I wonder, would people have difficulties buying a house where a serious crime took place? Say, for example, the house where Rachel O'Reilly was murdered. Would that... Personally, I wouldn't like to live in a house where a serious crime has been committed.
Yeah, well, I think I'd get the heebie-jeebies with the garage part of it anyway. Certainly knowing what happened there, and the victim in this case, he did suffer whatever about the circumstances of the incident. No one deserves to be tortured and be told that they're going to be killed and to be waterboarded. It's horrific. I mean, sometimes we look at Jonathan Dowdall like he was a bit of a fool. Yes, he was, but I mean, that crime that he committed was horrendous, really, really horrific, and he did prison time for it. Some would argue not enough prison time, but I still think it's extraordinary that we're talking about now this man is going to be released potentially within the next year, being potentially a millionaire still.
Well, there was one thing he was a fool for, Paul, and that was filming it and keeping the SD card. What an idiot.
Fool, and to have an associate of his, filming it as well, while him and his father did it. A really horrendous crime, and not anything that can ever be, justified, I think.
And I think we can be sure that, okay, so I think it's 7,995,000, the asking price, but the Dublin property market is so hot at the minute, it'll go for well over that.
Well over, yeah, well over. It could be 20, 30, 40, 50 grand more. Yeah.
Mm.
So, I mean, he's in for a serious payday. Now, look, whether he's admitted to the witness protection program or not, yes, there is a potential threat to his life from multiple different factions. Let's be honest, he's no friend of the Hutches at the moment. Obviously the Kinahans, although he has tried to mend fences with the Kinahans, he certainly tried that during the trial of Jerry the Monk Hutch. And then obviously among dissidents even, he's highly, highly unpopular. So yeah, I think he's always going to be looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life. So I feel more for his family in that than him, really.
Absolutely, but I think it's fair to say he'd be looking over both shoulders.
Yeah, this is the thing. I'm curious. Like, this obviously, when I saw the ad, I was curious. Has he been released? So I did go to check, but he is still, yes, very firmly in Limerick prison. He was on a landing completely by himself. There's now a couple of people on the landing, including Barbie Kardashian, well-known violent prisoner, is on the exact same landing as him, and a couple of other. But basically, he is locked up for about 23 hours a day. He gets time for exercise, but he's there in Limerick prison serving about a 4-year sentence, which he has done. He's in his second year of. So maybe by the end of this year, but I'm saying, I haven't really done the maths. I'm saying next year would be the release date, unless something happens in the interim where Gardaí have admitted him to the witness protection program and then he's given a temporary release. We'll see what happens. But at the moment, I think next year.
So I want to ask you something. So just to refresh our memory, he was charged with the murder, the Regency murder, and then he pleaded guilty to facilitating the murder.
Yes.
And then he gave evidence against Jerry Hutch, and Jerry Hutch, as we know, was acquitted by Miss Justice Tara Burns in the Special Criminal Court and the two other judges.
And Jonathan Dowdall's evidence was highly
priced.
Yes, it completely fell on its face. It was highly criticised by the judges and not accepted by the judges of the Special Criminal Court.
And one of the things he claimed was that Jerry Hutch had confessed to the murder. My question is this: do you think he's sitting there going, what the hell have I done?
I used to think that like, oh yes, he must be, but in a way, I think he's after getting away with murder in more ways than one. Like, I mean, okay, yes, he's gone to prison, but a relatively short period of time for facilitating probably the most high-profile murder, gangland murder in the history of the state. And then, okay, yes, as I said, look, his life he'll be looking over his shoulder in one sense, but I think just in terms of the law, he's got away with an awful lot, and now he's selling this house for several $100,000. I think he might have the last laugh in a way.
But he will, as you say, he always will have that a threat, effectively, and several possible threats against him for the rest of his days. So he won't have a moment's peace when he gets out of prison, no matter where he goes.
Well, I'm not sure what his end game was. I mean, the second that he took the witness stand, other than I think he thought he was going to get a sweet deal with the state and that he would be protected and that he would get away with the crimes that he had committed. And in particular, I think he thought that he was doing this for a trade-off for a witness protection, and that he would get this great mansion out in another country and he would be protected till the end of his days. It's looking increasingly like that's not the case. That's not going to happen. So yeah, but I still think, protection or no, with the money that he'll make from this house, I think he can get away and start a new life for himself, no problem.
Yeah, but say, I mean, look, it's an offence to say where people are living, but he's not in the witness security program, but he's not in it. But just say he went somewhere, you have to buy a house, and houses aren't cheap no matter where you go. You know what I mean? So 800 grand, I'm sure maybe he's got a bit of a mortgage or whatever to pay off, or he's got other things. So, it's not enough to retire on, I would venture.
And he's obviously a man who enjoys the high life, or the perception of the high life. I mean, if you look at the interior of the house, he's got, what would you call it, a cinema room up the top in the attic. Now, I think it's hideous personally, horrible red couches and a big screen TV. But he obviously enjoys the finer things in life. The kitchen is huge. I mean, anyone would dream to have a kitchen that size. And as I said, he's able to have the luxury of a fish pond, out the back garden. So he clearly is a man who enjoyed the finer things in life, and he had very expensive vehicles as well, a huge big driveway. So yeah, that's the only thing. Perhaps whatever life he does lead in the future now will be a far more modest one. But I still think, considering everything that he's done and the kind of people he got involved with, I still think he's getting off lucky.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, well, would if he so he was charged with Jerry Hutchison, weren't they all charged together with murder, right?
Yes.
So the case the case was effectively dismissed by Miss Justice Tara Burns.
Mm.
So when you say, what was the alternative for him? The alternative was probably he had a very good chance of beating that murder up.
I don't know. I suppose it's untested.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, yeah.
his involvement in it is clearer to me than that of Jerry Hutch. Now, okay, Jerry Hutch got involved in the
Hmm.
weapons. There's no question about that, and I think even he probably would openly admit to being involved in some sense in the transfer of the weapons, but he wasn't charged with that. So,
No.
but in terms of the overall involvement in the conspiracy itself, I actually think there was more tying him to it. Okay, tangentially so, but still, than even Jerry Hutch.
Yeah, I
That's
mean, the
just
hotel key.
yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, he literally booked into the hotel room. He got the hotel room for one of the key players in the murder plot. That to me is pretty clear evidence that you're involved in the conspiracy. Now, I know now they don't really charge people with the conspiracy to murder. The facilitation charge is what he got done for, but usually they just, if you're involved in the murder now, they charge you with murder. Um, yeah, look, he wasn't the gunman, and he wasn't even involved in the shooting of David Byrne, but he booked the hotel room. Okay, he might say innocently, but I mean, for him and his father to get involved in the sense that they did with the characters that they were involved with. Um, how could they have thought it was for anything other than something nefarious?
And that's a good point. So, say, for example, people in recent weeks have been done for facilitating murders before the Kinahan gang, and they've been jailed for doing things like buying phone credit. Okay.
Mm.
That was used in a phone, used in a murder or part of a murder hit. Getting a hotel room is a much higher level than going into a shop and getting 20 quid's worth of phone credit, is it not?
It is, and I mean, and again, even if he wants to say, "Oh, I didn't know somebody was going to be murdered," I think he knew full well that there was an offence going to be committed, and that he was involved in that. And so, I don't know. We'll never know because
No.
he didn't end up on trial for that. But I think it was a much more crystal clear case than the one they tried against Jerry Hutch, because they tried to say that Jerry Hutch was one of the men directly involved in the murder, that may have even pulled the trigger and killed David Byrne. I mean, there was just no evidence for that. There was absolutely no evidence for that. It was a joke to ever try him for that, in my opinion. I mean, I sat there for the entirety of that trial waiting for even a sliver of evidence of that. And I don't know how anybody, even if he had been tried before a jury, how any jury would ever have convicted him of the murder of David Byrne with that evidence. It just wasn't going to happen.
But that claim was central to Dowdall. I mean, he effectively introduced the claim that Mr. Hutch, which the judge rejected, that Mr. Hutch had shot
Mhm.
David Byrne himself. That really came from him. I don't think that would have been the state's case if he hadn't turned out or
Well,
turned turtle.
Well, maybe they wouldn't have said he was the shooter, but they had
Mm.
still charged him with murder at that point before they had Dowdall as a witness.
Oh no, that's
So,
my point. That the introduction of Dowdall's evidence ratcheted that up. That's what they went
yes.
for. I would argue because of what Dowdall was saying.
So, shall we talk about Angelo Pandeli? He's an infamous Australian mobster who now, it appears, has gotten into bed with the Kinahans.
So, yeah, so we'll go from the Dowdalls and the sort of the Hutch criminal case, the prosecution, to the Kinahans, who are obviously targeting them for the guards. I think, and perhaps we're guilty of this as well, we might be focusing on the Kinahans' activities in Ireland. So, in other words, whenever there's a big drug seizure, say there was one in friggin' Ballinasloe and they got 30 million quid's worth of heroin, or cocaine, we'd always go, is it the Kinahans, right? But we've known for quite some time that the Kinahans are an international cartel, that they don't just limit their activities to Ireland. In fact, some sources might suggest that Ireland is increasingly less important to the Kinahans. We all know there's the drugs gang in Clondalkin called the Family, who sources have told me are Ireland's biggest drugs gang. So the Kinahans are involved elsewhere. And this Angelo Pandeli fella, there was a really good investigation, international investigation. I know the Sunday Times were involved in it and various Australian media, I think 60 Minutes. And they did this story about Angelo Pandeli, who's the head of the Hells Angels in Australia, and he has now fled to Dubai and has linked up with Daniel Kinahan and is now involved in a super cartel with Daniel Kinahan. And the upshot of this story was that Kinahan and Pandeli, the allegation is, are sending cocaine all around the world, including to Australia. And I was really interested to find that the belief would be that the cocaine market around the world is 110 billion euro. A lot of money, and the Kinahans are centrally involved in that with this Angelo Pandeli fella.
Wow. And he is a serious player. As you said, Hells Angels. I saw just coincidentally, I saw your story and I went, oh, God, I was only just kind of watching a documentary about him maybe a couple of weeks ago, a 60 Minutes Australia documentary. It was fascinating. They were looking into, his basically his assets in Dubai and how he and a number of other associates were buying up properties. This sounds familiar, doesn't it? Buying up properties in the United Arab Emirates, including, I think, like an entire skyscraper was just completely occupied by all of these gangsters, these international gangsters. It wouldn't surprise me if the Kinahans are also among them. As you said, they're involved in a super cartel. We tend to focus a little too much on their activities in Ireland, but it just goes to show you they're all getting into bed with each other all over the world.
Now, there is one interesting aspect, slightly contradicting myself, about the Irish international link, and that is that Ireland appears to be a hub for the transportation of drugs. Now, there are a couple of cases that I can't really talk about because they're sub judice, but I think there's evidence to show that drugs have come into Ireland. Mega shipments of drugs have come into Ireland and they were destined for elsewhere. And I can think of two that the belief would be were destined for Australia, where Pandeli is active. Now, I remember doing a story in 2018 about the Kinahan cartel sending drugs to Australia in birthday cards. But that was, grams and bits there. They've obviously upped the game since then. And the belief would be that drugs from South America are coming to Ireland. We all knew that, like the MV Matthew, most of that cocaine was destined for Europe. But now the belief is that it's coming to Ireland for onward transit to the far side of the world. So it's really, really interesting that Ireland has effectively become an international hub for cocaine and other drugs.
Wow. I mean, we're small fry compared to maybe some of the business the Kinahans are making worldwide. It's just it's phenomenal.
I just want to say the other aspect of this is just remember we're talking about extradition and how difficult it is for the Irish to get. I know that people have been extradited to Holland and we know Italy, the Netherlands and Italy, but from memory, I think there was somebody extradited to Australia from Dubai a couple of years ago. So I just wonder, again, I said this in the last couple of pods, sunlight is the best disinfectant, and the Dubai authorities are obviously unhappy about this international spotlight on them. So I just wonder, will Pandeli be the next one to be like, Raffaele Imperiale and Radovan Taghi? They were kicked out. I wonder, will they go for Pandeli and will they go for Kinahan? The Kinahans?
Yeah, and I think the Kinahans are still operating out of Dubai. We haven't seen any evidence to the contrary, have we? And why would they go elsewhere at this moment in time? I mean, the business seems to be going quite well for them still. So, I mean, they have no reason beyond all of the talk that's happening here in Ireland, which I wonder how tuned into it are they even? They have no reason really to leave Dubai, do they, at the moment?
Well, I remember, I think they're well aware of what's happening in Ireland. And I think that they do observe things very keenly. Oh. And obviously, look, we know that there is a file being prepared for Daniel Kinahan. The guards have asked for him to be charged. I think it was over the murder of Nettie Hutch, Jerry Hutch's brother. And then there's also the investigation into directing a crime gang, both of which carry life. So, that's very serious. So I think they will be watching very, very closely as to what happens. But, maybe, remember the film Heat? Maybe they're just like, right, we're going to stay here. But the minute there's heat, we're gone. And maybe they have a way of getting out. Maybe that's what it is. We don't know.
We don't know. So look, we'll see what happens there. Shall we leave there?
Well, so we just mentioned briefly that really horrific attack in Clondalkin over the last couple of days. And I know you were doing that story. I try not to watch videos that I'm not working on because they're grim, but I did see that one. Jeez, you got a hell of a doing. You might tell us what happened or what we know.
Yeah, we work on so many horrendous things that you kind of lose count. I actually completely forgot about that. And I was only working on it yesterday and a bit today. This is an attack that happened in broad daylight. I'm just getting used to this now, where daily I'm being sent videos of another violent incident that's happened in Dublin, and it's sad to see. But this happened in the Neilstown, Clondalkin area yesterday afternoon. As I said, in broad daylight, youngsters involved in a bit of a melee, and one of these very young men, I wonder, is he even over 18? I'm not entirely sure, was brutally attacked with a machete. And as per usual, there's video footage of it, somebody filming this on their phone while this young lad is getting slashed effectively multiple times in the legs with a machete by equally as young lads. And he was hospitalized in relation to it. And as seems to be a bit of a trend now as well, the individual who was attacked, or certainly someone on his behalf, took photographs, graphic photographs of his injuries and shared them all over social media. I've had the misfortune of seeing them. We obviously didn't publish them because they're horrific. But
are they really bad?
Oh, they're really bad, really. But they do, I suppose they do show the reality of it, because the clip just looks like somebody's just hitting somebody. But I mean, if you can imagine, if you're getting hit multiple times in the leg with a machete, what your leg is going to look like. I just think it looks horrendous. But yeah, and that's maybe the second or third time in the last 2 weeks that I have been sent graphic injury photographs from attacks that have happened all over Dublin. But I suppose another thing that's of interest to us in relation to this incident is that the victim in this attack is somewhat associated with the mob boss, John Gilligan. Now, that's not to say, when we use the word associate, sometimes it might be interpreted like as though he's a henchman of John Gilligan or something like that. No, that isn't the case. For legal reasons, I can't, give you more specific details than that. But this person is associated I suppose, in a tangential sort of way to John Gilligan, and is very much, I suppose, the next generation of young gangster. Wannabe gangsters, yes, but very, very dangerous gangsters, because yes, they haven't got guns, but they're going around with machetes, for fuck's sake, in broad daylight, attacking each other. And they don't seem to care. They have no care for life.
There was a shooting there. I don't know even if it was reported, but I was talking to somebody today. This incident has been going on for a long time. There's been quite a lot of arson. I didn't know this. There's been about 6 or 7 arson attacks, but there was one shooting. So they do have access to firearms, and this is a feud that we're going to have to look at, because I think it's got real potential for serious injury.
It does, and I suppose that's why I'm following up on it today. Even I'm just trying to get the screenshot that I'm looking at here. So the individual who was attacked has since posted to social media, as I said, injuries, and also, I suppose, a bit of a warning, where he has referred to the people who attacked him as rats, and said that they're mad till they get smoked. So very much, I suppose, a threat to strike back. So I'm sure that we probably haven't seen the end of that feud. And as you've mentioned, yes, there have already been arson tax incidents in relation to this, but they're kids. This is the sad thing. Like they're children. In my eyes, they look like kids. If they're over 18, they're only barely over 18. And they're shooting at each other and attacking each other in the street with machetes. That's where we are.
So we did see. I did watch the video. Pretty bad. And you're right. It just looks as if they're smacking him, but you obviously it's a machete. But did you see the other video of the two fellas on the bike waiting for him?
Yes.
Now
Yeah.
that was chilling. Just sitting there. I think if memory, one of them was the pillion passenger was holding a machete. Well,
Mm.
fucking hell! An old lady walked past, and these two fellas are sitting there waiting to ambush somebody in broad daylight in Dublin.
Yeah, yeah, and then I mean, in another part of Dublin entirely, I was only covering another, I suppose, I hesitate to call it a feud, but a dispute in Finglas involving an infamous mobster, associate of an infamous mobster that we all refer to as Mr. Flashy, who was involved in a dispute over a woman, and there was a horrendous pipe bomb attack there in Finglas only a couple of days ago as well. And so, yeah, there's violence happening all over Dublin with people, I suppose, we're going to have to pay a bit more attention to now. Younger gangsters, up and coming gangsters. It's been interesting. I want to mention the Q&A. Actually, we're
Yeah,
going to do a Q&A pod, and we've got lots of interesting questions. And one of the questions actually surrounds this. Are there other people on our radar that we can't really talk about? The truth is, yeah, there are multiple people that we now probably need to get across and start learning who they are. And this is an example. This feud now in Clondalkin is another thing that we have to get across, because it looks as an entire generation of criminal now, isn't there?
yeah.
Coming up the
Yeah,
ranks.
and just to mention the Q&A, so the way we're doing it is we're asking for anybody who has a question. You can do it publicly, just on Twitter. You can mention us, I think it's called, or at us. I'm Nick the Hack, and Healy is Healy Hack. I wonder where you got that name from. Anyway, or you can DM us, and it can be anonymous. There's no problem. We've had some fantastic questions. One slightly off message was asking where is the best area to do a post office job. We weren't really asking for questions like that. We won't be answering that sort of stuff. But some really, there was one question. I won't spoil it, but you and I looked at the question, and I mentioned somebody, and you mentioned somebody. But we'll get into that. But we've had a really good number of questions, but the more the merrier, and it can be about any crime or defence issue. Absolutely no problem. Fire ahead, and we really love the interaction, and the questions have been fantastic.
It's questions have been great so far, so we're just going to keep gathering as many of them as we can. But it's great to see the interaction. We appreciate that we have an audience, and I mean, our video last week did incredible. I think it's got 60,000 views now. So, yeah, clearly people have an interest in what we have to say. I don't know why, but it's great, and so we really enjoy doing it. So, we'll have that Q&A pod, or maybe multiple podcasts, depending on how many questions we get in the coming
I know
weeks.
why. It's great content, and it's free. There you go.
Yeah,
What's not to love?
exactly. So we'll talk to you next week. Thanks very much.
All right. Thanks, everybody.